Once at a memorial service, I heard a son begin his eulogy about his father by saying, "Dad died because he did not want to clean out the basement." And we all laughed. But I thought of all the stuff that had accumulated in my basement, and I thought, I don't want my children to make that joke at my memorial service. So, at the beginning of the pandemic, I worked on cleaning out my basement. These days, thanks to months of isolation, my basement back in Maryland is cleaned out of most stuff. Now, I know I'm not alone in this, because back when I was cleaning my basement out and driving to Goodwill, there would be a line of cars waiting to unload. But still, there's some things I didn't get rid of. I have a 2-volume biography of the early life of Abraham Lincoln, autographed by the author, Carl Sandburg, published in 1926. It's worth about $100. I keep it in a special location in a bookcase. I'm comforted by the fact that I own the 2 volumes, and I feel a connection to the poet, who I know held that book in his hand when he signed his autograph. Now, I've not actually read the book. I don't want to wear it out. I have a few other possessions that I keep, but they are so fragile that I don't actually use them. Somewhere we have 2 cups that my partner Leslie and I bought on our honeymoon in England in the summer of 1981. That was the year of the royal wedding. The cups marked the wedding of Charles and Diana. We put them away for safekeeping, and we've never used them. Perhaps you have had the same experience. Perhaps you have possessions that you value, but they feel so fragile that you dare not use them. My colleague, the Reverend Dr. Patrick O'Neill, tells a story about this. About 40 years ago, he was serving his first little congregation out in the Yakima Valley of Washington State. And one day he got a call from a local farming family telling him that their mother had died and asking if he would come to do the burial service. They were not church people themselves, but their next-door neighbor had once attended a Unitarian Universalist church, and he recommended that the family call Patrick. The woman who died was an elderly woman, many years a widow. She and her husband were among the early farming families in the area, and in fact, they had become quite wealthy over the years. The land that she and her husband had bought cheaply in the 1920s, on which they had barely survived starvation through the Great Depression, turned into something of a gold mine in the 1940s when they irrigated it and discovered that apple trees fared exceptionally well in that volcanic soil. Within 20 years or so after World War II, Washington State apples were world-renowned, and the Yakima Valley was at the center of a worldwide agricultural business. This woman and her husband, who lived quite modestly, managed to leave their children a sizable fortune. When Patrick arrived at the house that evening to meet with the family and plan the funeral service, the woman's grown daughter was sitting in the living room with several cartons and crates, opened in front of her, and she was crying. "I just found these in the closet," she said. "They are 2 full sets of Wedgwood china from England that my mother apparently ordered from a catalog 30 years ago and then stored them in the closet. They've never been used, not even once. They had never even been taken out of the boxes that they came in, even to be looked at. I find this so sad," she said. "My mother was so afraid that she might chip or break even a single plate that she never once dared to take them out of the carton. That's how she was. That's so typical of our mom. None of us will ever know the deceased woman. Still, we can wonder about those beautiful unused dishes. The daughter saw them as symbolic of her mother's typical overcautious approach to life, and perhaps she was right. But what is the real story? We may think we know our parents well, but our parents are hidden from us by desires and dreams that we do not know. As he told the story, Patrick speculated about this. Was the old woman so fearful of damaging these beautiful things that she would not even put them out where she could enjoy looking at them? That really would be sad if it were true. Or did the dishes perhaps represent something else for the old woman? For this farm woman who had survived the hardships of the hardest years, when she and her family had endured near destitute poverty in the Great Depression of the 30s, were these exquisite dishes perchance some secret insurance against the return of hard times? Her personal barter, perhaps, against the years of drought and failed crops that she had known years before and wanted never again to revisit. Or could it be that these elegant place settings were a forgotten hope chest, perhaps ironically met for the very daughter who now judged her and wept at what she assumed was her mother's choice of caution over enjoyment in life? Or were they something else, these treasured dishes and fragile cups? The one impulsive gesture of extravagance, perhaps stored away in a closet by a country woman whose life was otherwise a model of moderation and restraint. We'll never know, of course, writes Patrick. And neither will her daughter ever know, for sure. But whatever story really accounts for the beautiful, unused dishes, don't you just wish that in all those years, the old woman had found it within herself at least once, to splurge a little? Oh, some afternoon when perhaps no one else was around, maybe, or better yet, maybe when an old friend was visiting, or perhaps with her daughter. Don't you wish she had just served herself at least one incredible, elegant cup of tea, perhaps a wonderful little dessert on that exquisite Chinaware. Wouldn't you hope that she would have dared it one day, risking it all, throwing caution to the wind, and just for the sheer living of it, allowed herself once to make bold use of the beauty and craft of those treasured dishes, those fine, fragile cups? It's a wish for us all. It's a wish for all those moments in our lives when we too are afraid of using the best that is in us, the good stuff, the stuff that we keep locked away inside us, like chinaware in a closet. Think of those moments in our lives when, for fear of breakage, for fear of failure, for fear of rejection, for fear of being hurt or laughed at, we too choose safety over adventure. Sometimes I just want to stay in that newly renovated basement and not come out. Moments when we choose retreat instead of choosing the challenge of growth and new learning. Now, I don't know about you, but I was raised in a German-American family that practiced restraint. Love and affection were more implied than said. Hugging only occurred rarely, and my parents did not use the silverware that was kept in a box in the storage room. In Kentucky, my aunt and my uncle on my father's side of the family, they kept a brand new set of tires in their garage. Perhaps Chrissy should have had this today. Brand new set of tires in their garage because they could remember a time back during the Depression and the Second World War when they could not buy tires. Like this old farm woman who lived through the Great Depression and who forever after lived her life out of a scarcity mentality, afraid to enjoy or employ the most beautiful possessions she had for fear that she might possibly lose them or break them. Well, many of us, live our lives out of a similar scarcity. Living in scarcity mode may have nothing to do with how much money or assets I have, how rich I am, or how poor I might be. Living in a scarcity mode means living in fear. It means living in fear of losing what I have, in fear of giving too much of myself away, and someday perhaps not having enough. It's difficult for scarcity people to give their time or their energy or their loyalty to anyone else, even to people they say they love, even to causes they claim to believe in. Now compare this way of living with people who live in an abundance mode. People who live in abundance mode, they live in positive energy. They are aware of all they have, all the ways in which their lives are blessed. They have no fear of giving themselves to others or to good works and great causes because they know the one great secret of spiritual living, the one that Francis of Assisi spoke of when he said, it is in giving that we receive. Abundant people have their good china unpacked and on display because they've learned long ago that's what China is for. Now, in my own life, last spring, I decided not to just stay in the newly renovated basement, but to respond to the call that went out from the UUA asking retired ministers to come out of retirement and help with a shortage of interim ministers. I took the risk, and I unpacked my own teacups. That is a way of saying I have been sharing and I will continue to share what wisdom I have learned as I serve as your minister in the last few months and in the coming months. How is it with your spirit these days? Are you living your life from a scarcity mode or an abundance mode? If your family were asked the question about you today, if your children or your best friends were asked the question, How would they respond? How would your children describe you? If your friends and fellow workers and neighbors were asked to describe you in these terms, what would they say about you? Would they call you a scarcity person or an abundance person? Our Unitarian Universalist faith is about helping people to live more abundant lives, more generous lives, more giving lives. Our church isn't about teaching people to live more timidly, more fearfully, more guardedly in the world. Our faith calls each of us to take risks, not to just clean the basement, but to live and to love courageously in this world. These days, as we learn to live with COVID, this is what I hope for when I venture out to church on Sunday morning. I come here hoping that being with all of you will enrich my life, and that I, in turn, in some way will enrich yours. We come to church hoping it will bring greater abundance to our lives, spiritual, emotional, intellectual, aesthetic, communal abundance. Our faith calls us to live our lives from a sense of abundance, with a greater appreciation and a greater awareness, and use all of the best that is in us, the good stuff inside each of us, the good china, if you will, our best talents, our deepest loves, our highest ideals, our hopes, our dreams. I want to end the sermon the way Reverend Patrick O'Neill ended his story about the teacups. Patrick said, "So here, then, is a little spiritual exercise for you to try this week." And he said, "You thought being a Unitarian Universalist meant never having to do spiritual exercises. But this takes courage, and it is not without risk. Some afternoon this week, or perhaps some early morning, when there's no one else around, go ahead and take down the nicest cup in your house and have yourself a cup of tea. Have it in memory of that old farm woman in Yakima, Washington, who you never met. And while you're doing that, give thanks. This gesture of abundance, it will change the way you live the rest of your week, and maybe even the rest of your life. Now,